The hum of the engines was steady, the kind of sound passengers quickly tune out at 30,000 feet. She sat quietly in seat 14C, blending in like any other traveler with her book open and headphones in. But when the captain's voice suddenly broke through the intercom, calm, commanding, and unmistakably directed at her, using a name no civilian should know, the entire cabin froze. Who was this woman, and why did the captain just reveal she wasn't who she seemed? The steady hum of the engines was almost hypnotic. For most passengers, it was just another flight, 3 hours of recycled air, lukewarm coffee, and the faint rattle of carry-on bags shifting in the overhead compartments. Families settled in with tablets and snacks, business travelers pulled out laptops, and the flight attendants made their first quiet rounds. In the middle of all this, seat 14C looked unremarkable. A woman sat there, head slightly bowed, her hands resting calmly on her lap. She wore a plain jacket, jeans, and running shoes, nothing that drew attention. She could have been anyone. A teacher heading home, a mother visiting her children, a tourist returning from a short trip. But if anyone had looked closely, they might have noticed how her eyes moved. Not wandering aimlessly like the others, but scanning, cataloging, memorizing. Her name, according to the boarding pass, was Claire Martin. To most, that was just a name. But Claire Martin was not her name. Not really. She shifted slightly in her seat, glancing toward the aisle. Every move was casual, rehearsed to perfection. For years, she had practiced the art of blending in, of never being the loudest voice in the room, never being the face people remembered. Seat 14C wasn't just a number. It was cover. And today, more than ever, she needed to remain unseen. The plane climbed higher, punching through the last thin veil of clouds into clear blue skies. Passengers relaxed, some already drifting off to sleep. A flight attendant rolled by with a cart, and Claire gave a polite smile, accepting a cup of water. Her fingers brushed the plastic, steady and precise, though her mind was anywhere but calm. Inside her jacket pocket, folded carefully between a book and a set of earphones, was a document she wasn't supposed to have. A document that, if discovered, could change the balance of more than just her life. It was the reason she was here, the reason she had chosen this particular flight, this particular seat. Claire closed her eyes briefly, as though resting. In truth, she was calculating. Timing, positions, exit strategies. Years of training had drilled it into her. Always prepare for the moment things go wrong. She had learned long ago that ordinary flights could turn extraordinary in the span of a single breath. And in just a few minutes, that breath would come. The flight was smooth, the kind of ride where people forgot they were 30,000 feet above the ground. A baby giggled a few rows back, the businessman in 12A tapped rapidly on his keyboard, and the couple in 15D and 15E whispered over a shared set of earbuds. To anyone watching, it was just another uneventful trip. Until the captain's voice came through the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We'll be cruising at this altitude for the next 2 hours. Weather ahead looks clear, routine, comforting. People barely listened. A few passengers reached for headphones, others sipped their drinks. But then his tone shifted. And one more thing. To the passenger in seat 14C. Heads turned. A pause thickened the air. The captain never singled out passengers, not like this. Claire froze, her spine tightening, every nerve on alert. Code name, Aquila. The word hung in the cabin like a lightning strike. A ripple of confusion swept through the rows. People turned to look at her, faces puzzled, some even nervous. They didn't understand the meaning of the word, but they could feel the weight in the captain's voice. It wasn't casual. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. Claire's heart thudded once, hard. Years of conditioning kicked in. Don't react. Don't give them anything. She kept her expression neutral, but her hands pressed against her knees, ready to move if she had to. The businessman stopped typing. The couple pulled out their earbuds. The baby's mother hugged her child a little tighter. The flight attendants stood frozen in the aisle, their practiced smiles faltering as they exchanged uncertain glances. The entire cabin had shifted in an instant. from a place of routine comfort to a theater of suspicion. Someone whispered, "What does that mean?" Another muttered, "Is she in trouble?" Claire didn't answer. She couldn't. That word, Aquila, wasn't supposed to exist here, not on a passenger plane, not in the open. It was buried deep in classified files, a code name tied to missions that were never spoken of outside sealed rooms. And now it had been broadcast to 100 strangers. Her cover was gone. She glanced up the aisle, her eyes narrowing toward the cockpit door. Why had the captain called her out? Was he an ally? A threat? Or had someone forced him to say it? Around her, passengers shifted uncomfortably, waiting for her to explain, to deny, to do something. But Claire knew better. The more she said, the more she risked. Her only choice was silence. Yet inside, her mind was already racing because the use of that code name meant only one thing. Something was about to happen. And whatever it was, she was no longer just a passenger. She was the target. The air inside the cabin had shifted. What moments ago felt like a routine flight now pulsed with tension. Every eye in rows 10 through 18 kept flicking toward seat 14C, where Claire sat motionless, her expression unreadable. She didn't fidget. She didn't panic. That, more than anything, unnerved the passengers around her, because ordinary people looked guilty even when they weren't. But Claire, she looked calm. Too calm. Behind her mask of composure, her mind was a storm. Aquila. It had been years since she'd last heard the code. Years since she walked away from that world. She remembered the night she buried it all. Burning files, wiping data, vanishing into the anonymity of civilian life. She had sworn never to hear that word again. And yet, here it was, spoken by a captain's voice, cutting across the hush of recycled air. Her thoughts yanked backward, unbidden. Training rooms lit with harsh fluorescent lights. Silent corridors where men in suits whispered about missions no one would ever admit to. The first time she'd earned the name Aquila, Latin for eagle, a predator that saw from above, striking swiftly, unseen until it was too late. She had been one of the best. A ghost in crowded cities, a shadow in foreign wars. And then, after one mission that went too far, she disappeared. Or so she thought. Claire's hand slid into the pocket of her jacket, brushing against the folded document. Not just paper, but leverage. Proof of something powerful enough to make people hunt her across continents. She had kept it hidden, waiting for the right moment. This flight was supposed to be safe passage, a step toward the final handoff. But if the captain knew her code name, then someone else knew. And that meant her enemies were already moving. Passengers whispered louder now. A teenager in row 16 leaned forward to get a better look. A man across the aisle muttered, "She's not just some tourist." Fear began to ripple, quiet but sharp. The human instinct to sense danger was spreading seat by seat. Claire knew the clock was ticking. Whoever had exposed her identity wouldn't stop at words. Something was coming. Maybe on this plane. Maybe when it landed. She took a slow breath, steadying herself. Blend in but be ready. Her eyes swept the cabin again, this time calculating in detail. Emergency exits. Potential threats. Anyone who avoided eye contact. Anyone whose hands stayed too close to their bag. She wasn't just preparing anymore. She was shifting back into the role she thought she'd left behind. Because the truth was out now. She wasn't Claire Martin, the quiet passenger in 14C. She was Aquila. And the eagle never stayed grounded for long.